What is autism? According to autismspeaks.org, autism, or autism spectrum disorder, refers to a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. The IDEA Act defines it as a developmental disability significantly affecting verbal and nonverbal communication and social interaction, generally evident before the age of 3, that adversely affects a child's educational performance. When I first started working in the ASD classroom at Bemidji High School, the prevalence in autism was 1 in 88 students were affected by autism. As you can see, as late as 2018, that ratio has gone up to 1 in 59 children that are affected by autism. And it is almost 4 times as prevalent in boys than in girls. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. I first heard this quote from an assistant principal at the Bemidji High School when she was doing a presentation on autism. I didn't realize it was by Dr. Stephen Shore. But what Dr. Stephen Shore is meaning by this is that there's great diversity within the autism spectrum. While there are common challenges, such as communication, social interaction, sensory receptivity, and highly focused interests, these characteristics come together very differently for each individual on the spectrum. I really wanted to add this slide just to show that many students on the spectrum look like typical students. One of the first ASD students that I worked with looked very typical, looked like your average high school male student, when in fact he was probably one of the lowest functioning ASD students that I've ever worked with. As it's stated in the IDEA Act definition of autism, this disability adversely affects a child's educational performance. These are some of the ways that autism will affect learning performance. Narrow focus. Children with autism may be able to focus on very specific details, but also may be unable to pull back and see the big picture. This might affect in remembering the details of a story shared, but not necessarily the main idea of the story. They may struggle to summarize their own or others' ideas. One way a teacher might be able to address this is by placing the information into a pattern to reveal the larger pattern of the information as a whole. Language development issues. Struggles with language is one of the main ways autism affects learning. The problem with language development are often the first signs of autism in a child. Early intervention that takes into account a child's interest is one of the most effective ways to address the language development issue. As educators, we need to participate in helping the children with autism who have the language delays better develop those language skills. Poor nonverbal skills. Typically, people who cannot communicate verbally compensate with nonverbal communication. This may not be an option for some autistic students who might also struggle with nonverbal communication. Eye contact and gestures may be difficult for some of these students, but with language development, these skills can be developed. Narrow interests. Autistic students may be exceptionally skilled in certain areas like math or music, but a narrow range of high interest means it can be difficult to engage them in other areas of learning. These narrow and sometimes very intense interests manifest in repetitive play or emotions. Children may struggle to understand that others do not share their interest and might not realize that they are frustrating people by asking so many questions or talking about the interests so much. But it is possible to use these narrow interests as kind of like a jumping off point for a variety of learning opportunities. Students can research their particular interests and learn how to manage how they communicate with others about it. This is also a really good opportunity to expand an ASD student's big picture skills by placing the interest in its larger context. Attention issues. Paying attention can be challenging for anybody, but especially for a student with autism. They can be easily distracted by stimulants that barely register for other students or the average typical student. The texture of their clothing, or lights being too bright, or different sounds that maybe other students don't even notice. Sensory issues. Students with autism often have sensory issues. The student might be either undersensitive or extremely sensitive to light or touch, or the student may crave deep pressure or be calmed by chewing things. If a child can't say, "Hey, I'm struggling here," that student may compensate by doing something like chewing pencils or rocking, or trying to provide those sensory needs. If a general education teacher is not trained to notice these types of behaviors, sometimes these kids with ASD often get, quote unquote, punished for bad behavior. So these are some of the issues. Communication issues, a narrow focus, and struggles with attention can all present learning challenges for autistic students. But through information, a better understanding of how autism can affect learning is an important step towards addressing those difficulties. Classroom management strategies. When teaching students with ASD, these are some things that should be considered. Sensory factors. Teachers should be very predictable. Use concrete language. Be observant of tasks and activities that create frustrations. Provide opportunities for calming or sensory breaks. Take opportunities to teach social skills. And, of course, treat students as individuals. Sensory factors in the classroom. Auditory, visual, tactile, vestibular, gustatory, and olfactory. Auditory. There are many things to consider when looking at the auditory factors in your classroom. Are there fans, loudspeakers, fire alarms, several people talking at once? What is the sound level of the classroom? What is the predictability and repetitiveness of the sounds? What can be done to minimize the negative effects of these sounds may have on the students? What is the individual's comprehension of verbal information? How much time does it take for the student to process auditory information? Visual. What are the visual distractors in the classroom? Light, movement, reflection, background patterns. These might affect the student's ability to attend to the learning activity. Some ASD students could be either undersensitive or extremely sensitive to light. Tactile. Are there any textures that seem to be too abrasive for the child? How about classroom temperatures? Are the temperatures appropriate to minimize the negative effects on the student? Does the student demonstrate a need to explore through touch and yet really doesn't want to be touched or avoid being touched by others? The student might be either undersensitive or extremely sensitive. What about different objects that you would use during the lesson? Does the student want to touch them or not? These are some things that need to be considered in a tactile classroom environment. Vestibular. Sometimes students with autism will spin or bounce. This means they're trying to stimulate their vestibular system, which is their inner ear that helps with balance. It also helps the body when it's moving and lets it know how fast or slow it's going. Any movement activity will engage the vestibular system. And so these movement activities can be both stimulating for the under-responsive child and calming for the over-responsive or sensory-seeking student. So when in a classroom, some of the things to consider are: how is the student's need to move and exercise being accommodated? What are the individual's reaction to these movements? How can you accommodate some of these movement needs without jeopardizing the attention and learning of other students in the classroom? Gustatory and olfactory senses. Gustatory is the sense of taste. Olfactory is sense of smell. So what are the students' preferences in taste and smell? Obviously with food or other materials. What are the students' responses to different smells of materials? And how is that going to go into your decision making about classroom activities? Also, another thing I might add into this is teachable moments. So what's an appropriate reaction or appropriate behavior when a student is affected by a taste or a smell that is not something that they like? How can you teach that social skill when reacting to smell or taste? One thing that will be a huge stress reliever in the classroom is for you as a teacher to be as predictable as you possibly can. Use visuals in the classroom. This is beneficial for all students in the classroom, but especially for those with autism. Being predictable in the classroom eases anxiety for all students. Students will be less worried about what's going to happen next and will be able to focus better on the work that is in front of them. Of course, just like any classroom, there will probably be unpredictable changes in that schedule, but it's a great moment to model how to handle changes appropriately. Plan for transitions and prepare the students for change. Students with autism will often find any transitions and changes stressful. These visual schedules can be used to help them understand the necessary changes. Use social stories with illustrations to prepare the students for new situations, or to coach them through situations that have been difficult for them. Students with autism tend to be very literal thinkers. They will sometimes find it very difficult to understand sarcasm. Also, they will sometimes have difficulty understanding figurative language. This is a great opportunity to teach figurative language and hidden meanings in certain terms. Observe tasks and activities that create frustration with ASD students. Assess your lessons and your activities. Try to include sensory experiences that are calming for the students. Adapt and differentiate tasks and materials to help motivate participation. That's not to say that whenever a ASD student comes across some challenges in the activity, that it needs to be changed entirely. This is another good opportunity to teach coping mechanisms and give the students tools to overcome some aspects of the lesson or activities that are challenging for the student. If we can teach these students to cope with challenging aspects of these lessons, give them tools to work through these challenging aspects, it will help them develop perseverance to take on further challenges throughout their lives. Provide opportunities for calming sensory breaks. Some schools have designated classrooms where students can go to calm down. Maybe try to have a designated area in the classroom where students can go calm down. Here are a few examples of calming techniques that can be used for students with ASD. In my experience, I've noticed that sometimes deep pressure helps reset and calm the brain. Weighted blankets, pillow sandwich, cookie dough, weighted vest, or simply have the student move heavy objects. Give the student a task of helping move books or chairs or tables. This can be something that will help to calm some students down. I've mentioned this a little bit throughout this presentation, but it is important to take opportunities to teach social skills. Always try to model appropriate social skills. Provide opportunities for interaction with peers who have appropriate social behavior, and always be on the lookout for social skill teachable moments. Treat students as individuals. As mentioned earlier, autism can affect individuals differently. Model patience, understanding, and respect when working with ASD students, as one should with all students. Sometimes students with ASD are unable to communicate that they are uncomfortable, and we treat their craving for sensory needs as bad behavior. And in turn, sometimes they're punished for what we perceive as bad behavior when they're just simply trying to communicate with us. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to view and listen to this presentation. I hope that it is helpful.